Bienvenida.
Bienvenue.
This week on Travelogue Media.
So a little saying in the turtle world is hot mamas, cool daddies. If you have really hot nests, you're going to have females, and really cold nests, you're going to have males, but that is throughout the nest. So at the bottom of the nest, you're probably going to have males. At the top, you're going to have females. And
For this Earth Day edition of the Travelogue Media Podcast, we'll hear from Paul Hilbrand, a student at the University of the Virgin Islands. Paul's going to tell us about the research he's done on hawksbill turtle populations on Buck Island, which is just off St. Croix's north coast. Stay tuned. Greetings and blessings, listeners. Thanks for joining me for this Earth Day edition of the Travelogue Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Clarl, podcasting from the United Virgin Islands. Love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud using the hashtag Travelogue Media. That's Travelogue Media. Or send email to podcast@travelogue.media. This is the second episode of Season 6, and it's a bit sad because it's the last episode I'll be recording from the Virgin Islands, at least for a while. I'm going to Colorado to visit family, then studying Spanish in Guatemala. I'm going to make a real effort to see everyone at least one more time before I leave. But if not, I want you to know I'm glad we had a chance to connect, and I hope we can stay in touch through social media. So I've got some exciting things coming your way in Season 6. For now, you'll want to stick around for an Earth Day edition. Earth Day Network's mission is to diversify, educate, and activate the environmental movement worldwide. Growing out of the first Earth Day Network is the world's largest recruiter to the environmental movement, working with more than 50,000 partners in nearly 195 countries to build environmental democracy. More than 1 billion people now participate in Earth Day activities each year, making it the largest civic observance in the world. We work through a combination of education, public policy, and consumer campaigns. The first Earth Day on April 22, 1970 activated 20 million Americans from all walks of life and is widely credited with launching the modern environmental movement. The passage of the landmark Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and many other groundbreaking environmental laws soon followed. 20 years later, Earth Day went global, mobilizing 200 million people in 141 countries and lifting environmental issues onto the world stage. For more information on campaigns like green schools, reforestation, and endangered species, visit earthday.org.
So over the last few decades, hawksbill populations have decreased by roughly 80%, and all population estimates are solely based on females because they're easily accessible because they come up on the beach, and we know those beaches and we can get to them and take samples and just get numbers. So what this study is looking into is how males contribute to the population, and it's using microsatellite analysis. Microsatellites are tandem repeats in the DNA, and there are, so like this one specifically is CC5H7, and it repeats CTTT 16 times. And so we're using microsatellite analysis to identify individual males and obtain operational sex ratio, which is the amount of females and males who are sexually mature and contributing to the population. And then we're also trying to find evidence of multiple paternity. Sea turtles are known to have more than one father contributing to an individual nest. So my hypothesis were we should find a 1-to-1 female to male ratio, and I expect less than 10% multiple paternity in each nest. So I was fortunate enough to be an intern on Buck Island with the Park Service at Buck Island St. Croix, and I was a part of their female monitoring program, and that's where I was able to get all the female samples, and then I also took tissue samples from their respective hatchlings, from one nest from each individual, and we took 40 total individuals, female individuals. And then we compared the female and hatchling DNA to reconstruct the male genotypes. And this was backed up by a program called Jared. I manually reconstructed the male genotypes, and then I put it through the program to kind of be like a checks and balances system. And so what we found out, I have based my results on 24 nests because 16 nests didn't produce allele calls coming out of the gene scan machine. So right now we have essentially a 1-to-1 male to female ratio. There's 24 females compared to 26 males, and we have found a 12.5% multiple paternity rate, which is 3 out of the 24. I actually am expecting a little more with the complete data set, but I just, like I said, they're just not definitive enough to put them on the poster. And so I then proceeded to go ahead and do a little statistical analysis on the females and hatchlings by themselves and understand the DNA and the genetic variation in the population. We have expected heterozygosity versus observed, and they're pretty much similar, but it's really cool. We have a 90 to 70% heterozygosity, and that means that the genetic variation is quite doing very well in this population. They're not inbred, but they're also not completely outbred as well. And they're staying within the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, meaning there's currently no evolutionary processes happening in the DNA. They're not changing into a subpopulation or a completely different, distinct species. And this is all backed up by the inbreeding coefficient. -1 is highly inbred, +1 is highly outbred, and these guys are teetering on 0, which means they're keeping their genetic makeup that they have as Buck Island, but they're also getting an influence from around the Caribbean and keeping genetic variation flowing into the population. So they're getting influence from the population itself as Buck Island, but also having influence from outside in different regions of the Caribbean. This is a really cool finding because it means monitoring started back in 1988 on Buck Island, and the numbers have only increased. And this shows that the program and protecting them has been doing a really good job. It's not keeping them enclosed to where they're being inbred, and it's not flushing them away to where they're completely outbred. They're hopefully can soon be identified as their own population, and that will help. This project will help because it's refining the population estimates that were solely based on females. Now we can add males into the question or into the equation and start getting a more concrete answer on population, which will help in conservation and management practices for smaller parks like Buck Island. Rather than being lumped into the Caribbean pool, they can be lumped in as Buck Island National Monument themselves and hopefully get better protection in smaller quantities.
Okay, so this is you're just dealing with the hawksbill turtles.
Hawksbills, yeah, specifically hawksbills.
Okay, so do you think there's is there a significant difference, anything in terms of the population with the other species like green turtles?
Greens do nest on Buck Island as well. We even had one leatherback last year, but she was really early. We didn't get there to see her. I took samples on the greens, but I unfortunately am not running them, and I don't want to answer that question because I'm not 100% on it, if that's all right.
Yeah.
All the studies I've read are finding essentially a 1-to-1 sex ratio, which the sex ratio is very important because if you want to call it climate change, global warming, I'm just going to say rising temperatures, this could be highly affected because reptiles their sex is determined in the nest. They don't have chromosomes that determine their sex, it's temperature. So a little saying in the turtle world is hot mamas, cool daddies. If you have really hot nests, you're going to have females and really cold nests, you're going to have males, but that is throughout the nest. So at the bottom of the nest, you're probably going to have males. At the top, you're going to have females. And with rising temperatures, the hatchling sex ratios are skewing to female, and we haven't seen it in the sex ratios yet, but I think that's due to the fact that turtles take 20 to 25 years to reach sexual maturity. And though rising temperatures has been a topic for quite a while, I feel like research has only been within the last 20, 25 years for turtles at least. And so we're not seeing the skewing in adults yet because they take so long to reach sexual maturity.
So I'm sorry, when you say in the temperature, that means the temperature of the
nest. And then, yeah, the temperature of the nests being indicative of the sex of the turtle. Yeah, that's what I mean by the temperature, yeah.
And so just to clarify, the decline in the population
is mostly due to anthropogenic influences, so poaching, boat strikes, fishing entanglement, and stuff like that. But in the future, it could be because this is completely off my research, but on Buck Island, we saw with the north swell that happened last year, we saw 5 to 10 feet of the north side completely just taken into the water. And if you think about it, beaches are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's less and less space for them to lay their eggs. So that could in turn have a large effect on their population in general.
With the rate of that decline, this is over the last decade. I'm looking at the board here, the 80% decline. Do you think at that rate? Are you optimistic that they'll rebound?
I'm pretty optimistic about it, just because programs like the park has on Buck Island. We started off with 12 girls in 1988, and last year we had 56 hawksbills alone, and that was just turtles come back every 2 years or every 3 years. So that was actually a low year on the hawksbill side last year. I think it's been a decline overall, but I think the populations where they're protected and there's monitoring, I think people are doing a really good job at protecting them and keeping good data and understanding that the fact that if we protect it, they come back, they're able to regenerate their population on their own as long as there's no outside influences. And I think that has been very well produced and preserved at Buck Island and what the park is doing.
Is there a magic number in terms of population where because they're on the endangered list?
Hawksbills are critically endangered.
Critically endangered.
Critically.
Okay. So, what would you say their population would need to be before they're?
Well, Columbus wrote that you could step on turtles from the boat to get to the beach. So our baselines now, I don't know if you've heard of the term shifting baselines.
Yeah.
It's kind of like people are basing good estimates on, I don't know, like 100 years ago, when you shouldn't be basing off of that. You should base it off of actual before human influence.
Now, so the habitat on Buck Island, it's roughly similar in the different places, different islands here in the Virgin Islands, more or less, or
more or less. Yeah, it's got the same makeup. On the North Shore, you have Manchineel Forest, and that's where the hawksbills really like to nest. They don't just come up to the berm and nest right on the berm. They go back into the foliage and dig up the roots and everything. On the West Beach, you have a lot of deep, loose sand, and the greens really like to come up there. They can take their time and they have a lot of space. And then you have a really thin, rocky, sandy area here on South Shore. And on Turtle Bay, it goes back into the deep sand, but you get both species kind of nesting there at the same rate. So you have a definite difference in West Beach and North Shore. On the hawksbills love that North Shore foliage, and the greens thoroughly enjoy the West Beach open area. But yeah, it's similar makeup, but it's uninhabited. and it's closed at night, so nobody can go on the island at night except for researchers. So they have a really pristine area to do their nesting.
So what would you say was the most surprising thing you found over the course of doing your research?
The most surprising thing so far is the fact that I have a higher multiple paternity rate than I expected. And also, I didn't explain this graph to you, but on this graph, so here, gray is the nest, so we have 3 nests here, and white are the males, and we have 6 males. So this was a multiple paternity nest. So we had 3 females who had 2 males contributed to one of their nests. So that's accounted for 6 males here. Then we have 19 males who mated with a single or an individual 19 females and produced 1 nest. And then we have 1 male who mated with 2 females. And I don't know why I didn't think that I would find that, or when I was just analyzing it, it popped up and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I kind of expected more females to be mating, being more promiscuous per se, than to see the males to be promiscuous. But I think it's awesome that I found out that at least one was a little more promiscuous than all the other males. So to me, that's really cool. But it's also, I think, the most significant finding so far is just that they have a really good genetic variation and the population is pretty stable.
If you enjoyed learning about sea turtles, you may also want to check out Season 4, Episode 9. You'll find the link in the show notes. This concludes the Earth Day edition of the Travelogue Media Podcast. Until next week, hasta la victoria siempre. Walk tall, live free. Thanks for listening to the Travelogue Media Podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud. Just search the hashtag Travelogue Media. That's Travelogue Media. My email is podcast@travelogue.media. Please help support this podcast by rating and reviewing on iTunes and making a donation. Visit paypal.me/JSKmedia. See you next week.